Thank you for joining the Trees Around the Globe Student Research Campaign webinar for December 2020. And I just want to show you this picture first because it just blew me away. These were tree trimmers in the late 1800s. And this is how you don't want to measure tree height, by the way. If you take a look at that ladder and all the people, it's pretty intense. And yeah, so I just want to show that that was a pretty mind-blowing image right there. So yeah, super old tree, you can tell, been around a long time, but yeah, I thought this was a fun thing to do. All right, so today, Trees Are Land Cover, featuring Peter Nelson, our own Peter Nelson, co-lead for the campaign. And Peter is an instructor and research scientist at the College of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences at Oregon State University, and he's also the NASA Globe Observer Land Cover Science Lead. So we'll get to Peter's presentation in a second, but we're going to do a couple other things before that. And then at the end of this webinar, as you can see with the agenda, we're going to move on to some discussion. So we're going to have an introduction, which we're doing now, and then a little bit of trees on the news with Dr. Christopher Schumann. We're going to move to Peter's feature presentation, and then question and answer from the feature presentation. Dorian's going to talk to us about and show us some things that she's been doing with the story map and continuing what we've done so far. And then we're going to have a discussion on the next phase of year 3, the science and the planning student research. Right now, we are in the, the final part of the first quarter of year 3 of the campaign, the science section. We've already had the science presentation on tree height, on greenings, on the carbon cycle, and today it's going to be land cover. So that's the front-loaded science as part of the campaign. And then we're going to run to the next step using that science and planning student research. We're going to have kind of an informal discussion in the last, 10, 15 minutes, as long as we need at the end of the webinar today, just prior to any final question and answer. So I just want to showcase this. November 30th of 2020, we had the 25,000th tree height observation from the NASA Globe Observer Trees tool. And this came from, which is really cool because Peter is from Oregon. He works at Oregon State University in Corvallis, okay? This observation came from Corvallis, Oregon, but it is not Peter's. Peter is thinking that it's, I believe, Peter, you mentioned that it's potentially a teacher you're working with, you have been working with, as part of what you're doing, with your research and the work you're doing with Oregon State and the local teachers. So this is really cool to actually have it out here and showcase this, and Peter is our featured speaker. But this was a shareable that went out on social media last Friday. So we just want to showcase this. We had 25,000 tree height observation. If you don't remember, the trees tool in the NASA Globe Observer to measure tree height was released officially March 26th of 2019. So from March 26th to November 30th, we hit 25,000 tree height observations. And that's a huge number, okay? Because trees, a lot of people aren't as exciting as looking up at the sky at clouds and things like that. I think it is personally, but we're really excited to get 25,000, and we can't wait till we get the next 25,000. So, those of you, if you're out taking tree height observations, continue. Remember, be safe. You have to be safe. A little disclaimer. We're in this middle of a pandemic. A lot of places things are getting worse. So make sure you follow all your local rules and regulations and what the authorities say, and it's done safely, legally, and everything. So I know we don't have to constantly reinforce that because you're a great group of people, great group of participants and citizen scientists, students, educators. But we really want you to be safe when you're out doing this, and take precaution with everything you do. So the priority here is for you to maintain safety and be healthy. So super excited about that. Here's our core campaign team as usual. Won't go through that anymore. But here's the updated metric slides, which I show each time, where we just passed 57,700 measurements from over 24,000 global sites since the beginning of the campaign, September 15th of 2018. So we have measurements coming in from all over. As there's lots of data to look at. IVSS, in the spring is focusing on data literacy. So, there's a lot of data out there to choose from for you have your students to look at, to create research projects, to investigate. And this is just showing you the map on the globe visualization system of where they're coming from, since the campaign started September 15th. And it's a combination of trees, land cover, greens, and the carbon cycle. So it's all these things combined here. And if you haven't seen it so far, on the webinar page, we have 27 recorded webinars, regular campaign webinars, and then we have 8 special ones that we did with other, other campaigns in like the European Phenology campaign, ones we did with some of the other ones. We did a Facebook Live one as well from the Goddard TV studios. So we've done a bunch of these different ones. We did one with NSIDC and looking at open altimetry with Amy Fitzgerald. So yeah, so lots of things. We have participants from 53 countries. And also, check out the blogs. Very cool. I just put a blog up yesterday about the 25,000th tree height measurement from the NASA Global Observer Trees tool. And you can see our blogs are closing in on 100,000 views. So super exciting. Check it out. There's 38 blogs up there since we started the campaign September 15th. So with this scaffold structure, as I mentioned, we are at the top of this at the end of the first quarter here, this one that says September 2020 through December 2020, the science. So we're going to finalize that today with Peter's presentation on land cover with trees are land cover. And then come January, and we haven't got the exact date for the January webinar yet, but we will be planning that Monday of next week. We'll be getting that date out to you very soon. And but we're going to be focusing on how to take that science and then help how we can and how you can as educators help your students figure out what they want to do with their student research if they plan on submitting it to IVSS, or if in the United States, submitting it to the SRS, the regional SRS. It's going to be all virtual this year, so we got a lot of data to look at. So this is what we want to focus on for the second quarter, this science and the planning student research. Now, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Christopher Schumann, and we will be learning about trees in the news.
Thanks, Brian.
You got it.
I just couldn't resist this study, in part because I know several of the authors in the very long author list and how hard they were working on this project before we all started working from home in March. So when it came out late this year, it just struck me as one that had to be shared with you all. The title of the paper, it's in Nature, an unexpectedly large count of trees in the West African Sahara and Sahel areas. Basically, it's a pretty inhospitable place to work. And so one of the leads that I associated with at Goddard, Compton Jim Tucker, and a number of his long-term colleagues, he tells me, figured out a way to collect the high-resolution sort of national security level imagery, which is available for NASA research, and to put together the coverage needed to map trees over 1.3 million square kilometers. So I'm a cold weather kind of guy. I understand the deserts can get cold, but I would not want to be out in the field under any circumstances trying to count the trees across 1.3 million square kilometers. That's 500,000 square miles. So it's a really impressive feat. There's a lot of reasons to do this. Some of those are captured in the bullet points. But especially in these marginal areas, those trees have simply not been focused on, and in part because early remote sensing imagery just didn't have enough resolution to do much there. So they focused on more contiguous forests elsewhere, like rainforests and such. So this is a real achievement when they could map 1.8 billion individual trees greater than 3 meters squared in crown area. So this is not tree height, but I happen to know that they are working on stereo imagery as well that will eventually, once they figure out how to run it through the supercomputer that generated these results, should generate a whole lot of tree height data to go with the crown area data. So just imagine 11,000 sub-meter resolution satellite images. We're talking 50 centimeters typically from the series of sensors that they used. So a lot of data storage, a lot of data processing, and the key thing is the algorithm that was used was trained by the folks that I work with, who measured almost 90,000 trees individually on those images in a transect from the driest part of the area to the wetter part of the area. So as you can see in one of the lower bullet points, very few trees per hectare in a hyper-arid area, less than 1 per hectare, to almost 10 in the arid, to 30 plus trees in the semi-arid, and to approaching 50 trees in the subhuman areas. So even 47 trees per hectare is not a lot of tree coverage. So it is a real research success being able to count that many trees across such a large area using these new techniques. So it's just a really cool thing to do. The authors go on to suggest that this would be a way to monitor trees outside of forests globally. I think that is an admirable goal, as you'll see in some of the images coming up here. The contrast between the fairly barren soil and the tree cover aided this study, I think. So go to the next slide, Brian. So there in West Africa is the red box, which is shown in more detail with some tree density data plotted on top of it, and the different climate zones from arid to subhumid, getting close to the tropical rainforest areas that are shown in the upper left panel as bright green and darker green areas. So you can get an illustration from basically the captured areas shown in the green subpanels, how the density varies as you go across this region. So it's, as I said before, it's an area that the early Landsat type remote sensing data simply just didn't have the resolution to resolve. 30 meter pixels, 30 meters on a side, that is, just can't capture these sub 10 meter tree canopy or tree crown areas. So this kind of my hat's off to the people that thought up this study and generated the resources to gather all the data together and process it. These are people I know well from when I was back in Building 33, and so it's a tip of the hat to them to show off their work here. Let's move to the next slide. So here's some of their sort of training data where they're going in and they're counting trees, measuring tree crown areas, and feeding that into the algorithm. This is a visualization from SVS, which I'm going to drop in the chat here, so you can follow. You can pick this up after this talk later, and it's just, I just think it's astounding that they were able to figure out how to do this. Next slide. So there we go, from the hyper-arid to the arid, semi-arid, subhumid areas in the countries of West Africa that are covered. Again, these are visuals which you can find at the Scientific Visualization Studio here at Goddard that generated this summary of the study that we're about to see. Next slide. And there's that trees per hectare. One of the things that is suggested here, but is not documented, is how does the soil productivity vary across the area? So that's one of the things that grabbed me, being coming from the geology side of things, is that there's clearly some relationship that's more complicated than just rainfall alone. But that would require field work because, as far as I know, nobody's figured out how to characterize soil productivity remotely, at least not over vast areas, even with high resolution satellite data. So I think the last slide is the SVS animation. Oh, there's some links that give you more detail. There were some press releases put out by NASA, and they give you essentially all those details. And there's a sort of an illustration of the test data that they used to assess the algorithms results, and where they actually checked the work of the algorithm, essentially. So that's pretty cool. And somewhere in there should be the link to the animation that I just put in the chat. Maybe it's the next slide, Brian? Or is one of those, is one of those live? One of those links should be live.
Let me see if it opens up well on here.
Or just get the one out of the chat. That should work.
I'm gonna do this here because it's easier to do it this way.
Yep.
Alrighty.
So anyway, a pretty astonishing achievement that I thought deserved some time with us.
This one here, correct?
Yep.
All right, let me play this.
Yep.
Ready? Here we go.
Scientists from NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, along with their international collaborators, have demonstrated a new method for mapping the location and size of trees growing outside of forests. The big surprise? They discovered an unexpectedly high number of trees in semi-arid regions, often thought of as too dry to support plant life. Mapping non-forest trees with this level of precision was previously impossible across borders.
Yeah, it must be a slow SVS right now.
Well, at any rate, everybody has access to the link, and they can pull that and take a look at
technology.
Yep, I'm gonna stop sharing that. It looks like SVS is a little slow right now.
They have been known to have issues because they have so many large animations there that at any rate, thanks for traveling to West Africa with me and taking a look at sort of revolutionary research. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Christopher, for that. Yeah, lots of great stuff there. And yeah, I recommend you go check out the SVS video, which showcases what Dr. June was talking about earlier. All right. So today's featured talk, trees are land cover. And once again, I'm going to pass it over to Peter Nelson. Once again, he is our campaign co-lead, and you've seen him do lots of online tutorials during the webinars, looking at data analysis and using different online tools to, to look at the ground-based and space-based data as well. Today's here to talk to you about trees are land cover because he is the Globe Land Cover Science Lead and researcher and instructor at Oregon State University. And you can see where that's located here on a map. There's a campus of it there. So it's in, in Corvallis, Oregon, on the west coast of the United States. And let me go ahead and stop sharing and pass it over to you, Peter.
All right, thanks, Brian. And I appreciate everybody coming and joining me today on this December. I see a lot of wonderful, familiar faces here and names. And so give me a moment here while I pull up my presentation. And all right. Okay, everybody can see that screen? My trees are land cover.
Looks good.
All right. So to me, this is kind of an important piece. Land cover is a very important attribute and characteristic of Earth. what makes Earth very different than Mars is the fact that we have this biosphere, we have this vegetation that's living, and this has been a fundamental thing that people have been tracking and keeping track of for as long as they've been using resources here on Earth. But really, what I want to kind of highlight is how we are changing. The science is changing to help us better understand and to monitor and to inventory where trees are located, and just as important is what is happening over time to those trees. Now, scientists like to use some specific vocabulary, and land cover is one of those, apparently, that trips a lot of people up. And so I want to kind of highlight that when I'm talking about land cover here, we're talking about anything that covers the land, i.e. not ocean, right? So if you are somewhere, you are not on a boat, you are on land. And what covers that land is very important to keep track of, because it affects the heat around us, it affects our air quality around us, and it can actually affect a lot about how we arrange ourselves and the way that we actually move in the world. And so this is a very important characteristic and measurement. And trees are part of land cover. They're not the only thing in there, but they're a very important part. And as Christopher was mentioning about, the biases of identifying trees from remote sensing data and some of the areas that we've missed in the past, comes back to kind of our method, our science. But it's important to recognize that, trees and forests cover about 31% of the land area. Now, what covers up the other 70%? That's a really interesting question. The other thing is, has this number been the same over time? Or has this increased or decreased? Well, those are some of these things that, again, we're mapping, measuring, and monitoring this resource. And a lot of people do it individually, but there really is a push here, like with the GLOBE program, to work and understand the larger cycles and systems of Earth. And so let's see, can we actually move slides? Yes. All right. And so all of this is, because Earth is a system, right? And so what happens to these trees, how they grow, how fast they grow, are they impacted by drought or stress from insects or human activities? These are all things that make trees not static on the landscape. They are actually quite dynamic, and they respond to the Earth as a system. And they contribute to Earth as a system through their photosynthesis and through their CO2 exchange and oxygen exchange, right? And so these are all really important reasons for tracking trees and where they're located on the land. And importantly, it changes. It changes over time. And so just because we do an inventory like what Christopher was showing, doesn't mean that we're done. In fact, we need to go back every year at least and keep track of these resources and see how are they changing. Is the photosynthesis changing? Is the soil changing in some manner? And these changes, are really relevant to people's lives. And that's a kind of a big reason why people care about it. But there's also the impact on wildlife and all the other creatures and vegetation that's on Earth. And usually trees are not the first thing that show up on a landscape. And so usually when you start seeing trees on the landscape, you have gone through some successional processes. And what I mean by that is you usually have to have some nutrients in the soil in some way. And a lot of times that comes from grasses or maybe shrubs or some other vegetation like that, that first helps to develop the soil in such a way that trees can get to the resources that they need and that they can become that long-lived species in that environment. And so when you see trees, usually they are not at the beginning of that cycle. And so if you hear a tree is 100 years old, well, that ecosystem is much older than that. And so, you know, the age of trees or the tree height is an important characteristic of understanding that ecosystem and the processes that are happening there. And so recognizing that, it's just really important to keep track and to understand those things that are around us like that. So as I mentioned, luckily for us, just this last year, 2020, was the release of the Global Forest Resources Assessment that is put together by the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization. And so they have spent the last 5 years doing an inventory, trying to do that assessment of the current state of forest conditions and locations, and how they're changing on the landscape. And so for us, that gives us a good place to start understanding the broader context of trees around the globe. And as a result of that, we can start to see the distribution and where trees are located based off of these experts. And no, they didn't really include what Christopher just showed us. And so there is a lot of trees that are missing, as you can see in that northern area of Africa. And so maybe with this next assessment, that new tree counting piece and metrics that was shared at the beginning of this will actually get brought in and might change these numbers some, because currently they're not counted in this system because the size of them or where they are usually don't meet the criteria of what this report is going for. So definitions matter a lot when we're talking about trees and when somebody reports numbers back to you. And so I want to highlight this because for people who are starting to consider or think about a research project, this is a really good place to start looking at the broader numbers of trees that are out there. And importantly, remote sensing is the key to how they're doing this. And so a lot of what we've talked about is actually being used professionally as well as available to students here to replicate or to contribute to this type of research. So what is a tree and what is a forest? You know, these are vocabulary terms are really important. And we've just kind of been throwing them out at you guys a lot with this and maybe haven't really described or defined some of these things. Usually the way that that scientists describe a tree is a single trunk, a single stem of vegetation that comes up. Now, there's all kinds of trees that do not follow that rule and that don't, that actually have multiple stems. And so, again, it really depends on where you are, what this definition of a tree is. Some people have tried to use height as a definition for trees. And that has led into trouble when you're in Alaska and you have 20-foot tall trees or shrubs around you. And so all of a sudden, you know, you can see how this definition of what a tree is can sometimes be problematic. And so that is kind of an important thing to keep in mind, because when we start looking at these trees from space, we kind of have to think about some of those definitions. We can also use the sensors and some of the physical characteristics of these to help us to discriminate between some of these different trees where there's no leaves on them versus trees that have leaves on them. And also the structure and the color of the bark is an important piece of what we talk about here. And so, you know, there's about 60,000 tree species that are out there. So I don't feel like it's our job necessarily to understand every single one, because some of us may never encounter those trees unless we're in particular areas. And that's where everybody here has an opportunity to really dive in and contribute, because the trees that are around you usually relate to the climate. Or human interventions that are there. Sometimes past climates or past ways that the trees kind of have moved around, or we have as humans made use of these trees. So I just kind of want to highlight that definition of a tree is important, and it will come back as we look at some of the different ways that people have tried to define trees from space. So when we are looking at trees from space, as Christopher mentioned at the very beginning, that spatial resolution is really important. And so depending on whether you are zoomed out and looking at a very large area, like the whole continent, you won't be able to see the small little details. You can still see the green colors, you can see the overall patterns of that tree or vegetation, but you don't see the details, right? And so this has been that trade-off that scientists have always had to make between seeing the individual trees versus being able to see the larger landscape. And so as a result of that, there becomes gaps in the data, like what we saw earlier, where there's just supposedly no trees in this area, but it really comes back to the science satellite tools that we have at our disposal. And it's been getting better because we've identified these limitations like that we have. And importantly, for land cover scientists like me, we really think about trees first. And trees and water are kind of some of the two big things. And the reason is because those trees are the first things, and that tree canopy is the first thing that the satellite will be seeing when it's looking down. It's the first thing to reflect that light back up. And so as a result, if we have really tall trees in an area, we don't see all the understory vegetation. We don't see sometimes the roads that are there or even the buildings. And so this top-down perspective can really hide the details on the ground. And so this is why, for me, I say don't just take a tree height measurement or estimate there, add that land cover measurement into what you're doing, whether you're using Globe Observer and can do a rapid assessment like that, or whether you actually lay out a measuring tape and do a more systematic sampling. Either way, providing that context to that individual tree height measurement that you made is really important from that satellite view. And so, as I mentioned, this all goes back to how the sun interacts with the surface of the Earth, and that surface could be vegetated cover, or it could be water, or snow and ice, or buildings. But it all comes back to this electromagnetic spectrum. And so, a lot of what we see is this visible light. This red, green, blue. The reason why these trees turn out green is because they're reflecting that green light, and our eyes pick up on that. But luckily, we have these sensors that allow us to make measurements beyond just what our eyes can see, and that discrimination of that green color. And so scientists are able to make use of some of the other characteristics that trees and forests, or groups of trees together, can kind of exhibit when that sunlight bounces around amongst the canopy of a tree. And I'm going to highlight kind of a graph here. And it's a little confusing at first, so bear with me as I walk you through it. What we're looking at here is the 8 different areas that the Landsat satellite measures. And what I want to highlight is we have a couple lines that are going horizontal across there, and they kind of group together in some areas. But you can see here in the middle where there's this 5, this band 5. This is one of these areas that is beyond what our eyes can see. We're stuck here in this visible part of the spectrum, and so you can kind of see there's this little green bump here. Well, that's the vegetation that's reflecting that light. But as we move beyond what our eyes can see into some other wavelengths of light, all of a sudden we can actually start to see this difference between lawn grass here, which has a really high reflectance value. That's one reason why that grass is green and it looks the way that it does to our eyes. But out here in this near infrared part of the spectrum, this allows us to easily be able to tell the difference between grass and 2 different types of trees here compared to water on the bottom. Really, the key here is Scientists look for areas like this and measurements that allow us to tell the difference between land cover types. And here we can even tell the difference here between an aspen leaf, which has a little bit more higher reflectivity in this wavelength than your blue spruce. Now, why that is, involves a little bit more investigation and a little bit more understanding of the physiology of aspen leaves versus a conifer tree like a blue spruce. But the key is, from space, we're able to make some discrimination about different land cover types by getting away from just what our eyes can see. Okay, and so that's really important because that's how scientists are able to really do a good job of tracking changes in trees and land cover type. And so as a result of definitions and different sensors, different funding priorities, there's now many maps with many definitions out there. And they're all quote unquote land cover maps, right? And so this can be really confusing to people out there, is which one do I choose? And why would I select that? And or even just trying to identify what's available to you. But I want to highlight that in the last 5 years, the land cover maps have become foundational. And within there is almost always a tree class. And we have to look at what those definitions of what the trees, how they define trees. But that is a really good starting place for many investigations and many scientists, not just a land cover scientist, but a wildlife biologist or a city planner might look to a land cover map to start their investigations to figure out how much trees have been identified in this area, and are they still there? But as a result, we have a lot of different maps that we have to sift through and decide which one is appropriate for my science question. Okay. And so we have a lot of definitions out there, and depending on what your purpose is, you might care more about a leaf area index, or kind of describing things in that way if you're a climate modeler. If you care about thinking about it just in a different way, you know, the University of Maryland has their definitions. And one thing I want to highlight here is that a lot of these definitions show a canopy greater than a certain height, right? And so this is where our tree height estimates actually can help us with this definition when we start looking at these maps. Is there a disagreement because of this height definition of what a tree or what a forest is, rather than the biology of what that genus or species is? Something to consider. I want to highlight that one of the challenges that you might encounter here, and that land cover scientists always have to try to deal with, is harmonizing legends like this. Now, if you work with the GLOBE data, there is the modified UNESCO code, and it has its definitions that are associated with it. And one thing I want to highlight is, you'll note here, the definition within GLOBE for a closed forest or a woodland forest is 5 meters tall. We will automatically have some disagreement when we compare our classifications in GLOBE to these other classifications, just simply because of that height definition. So, you know, this can end up becoming a larger problem and limit our ability to compare GLOBE data to these other authoritative data sets that are coming out. How much of an issue it is? Well, that might actually become a really good research question, right? And if you focus on this 2 to 5 meter class or kind of size area, can you identify those areas in your locale and help us to resolve this difference? Does it really matter that one land cover map might define trees being 5 meters tall, while another one defines it as 2 meters or taller? These are things that we don't really know sometimes until we start investigating these specific maps in our area. And so there's a couple ways of thinking about this, right? Trees at a specific point in time. And so we have a lot of land cover maps that were made for a particular year. In this case, 2019 is when this map was created for. And so here's what the trees are at this point in time. Now, I hope everybody here recognizes that trees grow, and that, even though a tree might be 2 meters tall right now, in a couple years, it might be over 5 meters. And so how do we account for that class change, for that change that happens as a result of the natural growth of this class, right? And so this point in time is really useful, but it doesn't really fully capture the interesting parts of a changing landscape. But there's lots of maps that are out there that can give you a sense for trees at a specific point in time. The other thing is that is now possible because we've been collecting remote sensing data from space for so long in a systematic fashion. We are now able to put together trees at not just a point in time, but across many years. And I want to highlight this area where this is where I got my first start watching trees transition from one type of land cover to a completely different one, all because of a process of wildfire. And so to me, what's amazing is that just by taking these point in time maps, if they're made in a consistent manner, you can actually just visually look across and you can see the changes, right? We can actually see in 1985, this area has a lot more green to it. A lot more forest was identified, tree cover. And then in 2002, right before this fire that happened in the middle of the summer of 2002, it was 500,000 acres, and you can see the amount of brown now that shows up in this map. And that was, going from trees to bare ground, or to grasses, or to shrubs, or to just trees starting their regrowth cycle again. And then we can see in 2017 how much tree cover has come back to that area. And so, this was for me an opportunity to really see the dynamic nature of trees, and how it's important to not only map them at one point in time like that, but to look at and think about them in this dynamic nature. And that trees don't just always go away, that they can come back, and that just because trees aren't there today doesn't mean that they won't be there in the future. And so I highlight this story in our Why Observe Land Cover video, because for me, this was this idea that we couldn't count the individual trees here. 500,000 acres, we couldn't figure that out. And so we had to step back and think about the land cover change that happened here, and think about the change of going from trees to one of these other categories, and then the dynamics that happened afterwards. This is all new ways of approaching monitoring land cover and trees. And what you just saw is a little bit of one of the big changes in our science. Instead of just having a hard classification that, like I was showing earlier, where somebody might define trees in a particular way, and that might not work for your research. Well, the land cover scientists have figured out, well, we need to actually help provide the base layers that you can then use to create your own classification with it. And so you're now able to get these percent coverages. And so how much of this area, and by area I mean pixels, how much of this pixel of this area is classified as water, or as shrubs, or as trees in some context. And then you as the end user can put that together in the way that you need to better model wildlife habitat, or to look at some of these changes like this. So I've kind of already done this, but I want to really highlight that this data is available to you. And so it's out there, and depending on the scale or the type of question that you're after, you might choose one or the other. I want to highlight here, there's this MODIS-based land cover map that is at 500 meter pixels. And this is a particular interesting product because it is globally consistent. As well as we now have the ability to put this together from 2001 to 2019. And so that allows you to look at some of these changes, like I was just showing you. Oh. And then, another one that has recently come out that I think is really interesting and a great contribution from our European colleagues is this Copernicus Global Land Cover Map. And this one really demonstrates what I was just kind of showing you, the new way that land cover scientists are thinking about delivering their information and delivering the data. And this can provide you a lot of flexibility. So you can look at this as a single class, where's the forest? Or you can start looking at some differences between that open forest versus a closed forest. And then you can also get at these fractional covers that I was showing you. So what is the percentage of tree cover in this area? What is the percentage of urban or built up area? And so there's a lot that's in here. And there's also this land cover change piece that allows you to focus in on the areas that you might want to go sample, where you might want to investigate to understand that why the scientists highlighted or identified these areas as change, and did they get it right? Because I'll tell you that just because somebody's made a map like this, there's errors in them. And depending on where you are in the world, those errors might mean more to you or they might not. And so it's always worthwhile investigating these individual products for your particular area. Here in the United States, there's a group of agencies that put together this national land cover data set here in the United States at 30-meter resolution. And you can see, again, they've also done several points in time going through. So this, if you're here in the United States, this might be one that you come across and might make more use out of than some of those other ones. I want to highlight that again, there's a lot that's out there, and so this is becoming more ubiquitous and more available to you. This is a kind of a newer version of showing how to look at what the forest dynamics. And again, this all goes back to that land cover map, and you can hear on this app that was built by the U.S. Forest Service. Right now, it only has a small bit of data in there, but here you can actually put together an animation that shows you that land cover change over time, and puts and allows you to look at one location and flip through it, which unlike having to look at the several different pieces like I showed, might be a little bit more useful. Again, you can look and you can see that not only here on this map they have a tree category, but importantly, they have this trees shrubs mix, or trees grass mix, or trees barren mix, because we have these areas that are not just trees. It's not just one land cover type. You have trees growing and you have these transitional areas. So, again, depending on your focus, you might be able to find one of these products, science products that might better suit your science question. So it's worthwhile investigating and going to see what they have. What's important is I've been showing you a lot of images. Images are data, and that's an important thing to remember here. But they can hide the true numbers that create those images. And so the lab I work in has a tool that allows you to actually pull out the pixel numbers so that you can see the photosynthesis, or you can see this shortwave infrared light, and you can actually identify a year of a fire here in the Yellowstone National Park, which was 1988. We can see we had something here at this point, and then we had a drop off, and that was the trees going away that got burned up. And then over time, we see the regrowth of trees coming back to almost the same level as they started off. Now, what this actually looks like on the ground, that's a fun question. But for me, this is the way that I look at the landscape, and I look for these long, slow trends like this that come after a disturbance. And depending on where I am in the world, this usually tells me when trees are growing and have come back into a landscape. But the key is you have to have a long enough period because trees take a long time to grow back in many places. Okay, so we have a lot of different ways of looking at land cover and trees in our landscapes. And so I want to end with just some questions here that you might be able to ask with this data, because I've shown you, it's great. Scientists have made maps, but I want to put forth that we want to investigate what are the land cover classes or the pixels in your particular area. And then, do they agree with what you measure on the ground? If they say there's a tree there, is there actually trees or is it grassland? Your pictures and your measurements can help us to resolve this issue. The other important one is, does the data reveal any tree land cover changes in your location? And then, is the data actually reliable for your area? And this is where scientists like me and many other people who work at NASA or work with NASA data are really wanting to understand where these maps work well and where they don't work well. So your feedback and actually your comparison and use of this in projects is really, really useful. So that was where I wanted to end my presentation, Trees Are Land Cover. And I hope that I've at least shown you that you can get basic information from a lot of these maps, but then how they relate to your area can become the interesting science investigations around you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Peter, for a wonderful presentation. Every time you speak, I always feel like we can actually do like a whole web series just on you alone. You have so much knowledge.
Thanks, Peter. I've been at this for a while. Let's just say that. But it all comes back to these interesting, like somebody made a map, and is it right? That's for me. That's the motivation. And I found many times I like to be able to come back to a scientist and say, why did you do this wrong?
Well, of course, when you make a presentation like that, you have tons of questions, and I want to read a couple of them from the chat box, starting with a young student in the West Coast named Tracy Illstrom. She asked, how is the Globe Forest Resources assessment determining tree count?
Right. So, Tracy, they are taking ground-based measurements that they have from authoritative sources in many cases. Forest Service, for instance, goes out and they put down an area, and then they measure every single tree in that area. And they then they report that back. And the key is that they do it in a way that is scientific. So they measure every single thing in that area. But it also means that they have to have lots of people involved and they have to have lots of data. And so that's where it becomes expensive and why it takes 5 years to make this assessment. So they do some of that. The other primary tool that they are using is the Collect Earth online tool that I have highlighted before in our webinars. And that allows us to put specific locations where we might have some ground measurements, or the way that we've been doing it for 70 years, ever since we could start flying a plane and taking pictures. We look at that image and we just count the trees that we can see. Exactly what Christopher was describing earlier, but we don't do it for the whole area. We sample. And so they use those samples, and then they get those spectral digital numbers like I was showing in that last graph. And then they put that in and they do a whole bunch of fancy math. And that's the way that they come up with their predictions. And that's what these maps are. They're predictions. And so there's errors in them and other things like that. But they tell you, we believe in this area there is 20 hectares plus or minus 1 hectare. And that goes back to the statistics that they have when they have from their ground sample or from the Collect Earth online high resolution imagery counting with it. And so when students are doing the biometry protocol, they're actually mimicking exactly what these scientists are doing. And the key is that we just need to share that and do some comparisons. But that's what the GLOBE program has with the biometry protocols is exactly that same kind of data that is getting fed into creating these land cover maps.
Thank you. It looks like she got her question answered, because I can see her nodding her head. We have another question in the chat box. Why is it important to not only document a location with trees, but to also document an area where there's no trees? Can this help us understand land cover any better?
Yes, is the answer to that. I had a great experience where I showed a map to somebody, and I had mapped it out as forest, and in fact, it was a grassland. And so what's important about that is because a land cover map can actually be the beginning of thinking about carbon in the landscape. Certain land cover types actually have carbon associated with them, standing carbon or other things, mainly standing carbon, growing carbon, carbon sequestration in there. There are certain land cover types, like a barren land cover type, would have probably zero or very little carbon in it, right? But then on the opposite side is our treed land cover. That would have a range of carbon amount in it, depending on the type of trees, in particular. And here in the western part of the United States, we have forests that accumulate some of the most biomass around outside of the Amazon rainforest. And so documenting that difference between barren land cover where there's no trees and areas where there's trees allows us to start thinking of and actually monitoring the carbon footprint on the landscape. And how is that changing over time? And if we remove those trees, what's the impact on the carbon budget? And so land cover, like I said, is just the beginning of starting to think about the system of Earth that's out there. And so again, you can think about just today, or you can you can think about and make measurements at different points in time and think about this as a continuum that we're on. And I think for me, that's an important part is sometimes there's really obvious reasons why there's no trees there. So, like it's underwater, but sometimes that is there because there was a volcano that exploded that actually like cut off the river and that flooded out those trees, and now the trees are actually submerged underneath the water. And so a lot of what we're talking about is the time of your time on Earth versus these trees' time on Earth. And so there's a lot of really good reasons to just document where things are at today so that people in the future also understand how things have changed. Long answer, but it's a good one.
Well, thank you for that. We have another question from that very inquisitive West Coast student there, Tracy. She asks, how does the green of landgrass have a distinguishable different wavelength spectra from the green of trees?
All right, Tracy, that's a great question. And it all goes into the structure of the forest. So as a tree grows, it starts casting a shadow. That's one of the things that obscures and actually will hide some of the vegetation or some of the other things that the sunlight will reflect off of. And so the sun angle is an important piece of this when you make your measurement. Because things will be illuminated differently at 9 a.m. than they are at 3 p.m. And this is a challenge for satellites as they go over. Certain things like mountaintops will be illuminated and will actually be warmer than valley bottoms for some of our satellites. And so as we move into, say, the near infrared and the shortwave infrared light, we actually start measuring more of the structural, that 3D characteristic of the forests. And that was one of the things that one of my former supervisors and mentors, Dr. Warren Cohen, he was able to map out the old growth forests here in the Pacific Northwest by focusing on shadow. And by focusing on the amount of shadow that's in that area. And so just tracking shadow allowed him to actually age out these pixels so that between 100 years up to about 300, about 500 years. After 500 years, they actually start brightening up and they start losing limbs and they start doing something different than what we expect. And so the age of the forest really impacts the way that the light will bounce around and reflect, and then what the sensor is able to actually see. And so a lot of times when we think about forests, we think about those as the dark spots on the landscape because they tend to capture all the light and very little of it tends to go out, at least as the trees get taller and as things get as the stems get denser together. So it's a really good metric of how closely spaced are trees, as well as an approximation for tree height itself, since we can't actually measure that with our optical imagery.
Peter, I have to chime in. Your background choice also shows that because you are inherently incorporating bare areas along with grass, you will get a different reflection of incoming solar energy than you will from trees, whether singularly or densely packed. So your background is part of the answer as well. That's me, the ex-geologist again. And Jim Irons would support this. It all comes from the soil somehow. I guess he doesn't like fish for dinner, but anyway, just had to chime in there. And,
no, that's perfect, Christopher. I mean, that's exactly right. And this has been, some of the challenges as we, work with some the coarser resolution or a moderate resolution satellite. We're not seeing the individual trees necessarily. We are getting an assemblage of all the different land cover elements that are there. At that point in time, and so that's part of the reason why we, having that percent cover on the ground allows us to better understand how much soil is coming out and reflecting versus it might be the bark or it might be the type of vegetation that's actually there. And yeah, I specifically selected this after, to kind of, show a different landscape from, one of the people that submitted through with our Globe Observer. But, this is an Alaskan landscape where we can see the tree density is very different. It takes about 10 years of continuous Landsat observations to actually capture this type of regrowth that we're seeing right behind me. And so, certain areas, it can just be a really long time for trees to encroach or to grow in an area. And so in that Biscuit Fire area that I was showing, what we're finding is that from the edge of where we identified the trees that are still growing, they can only expand about a quarter mile a year. And then, there is some good expansion that happens there in natural regeneration, but it will take a long time for those trees to get back to those same areas. But that's where, just mapping out where the trees are versus those barren areas allows us to actually make some approximations and model out a changing landscape and how our decisions or how a changing climate might affect the land cover elements and the way that they're arranged up there.
Cool.
Any other questions, Peter?
Yeah, we have 2 more questions before we move on to Dorian. The first one, I think it has to do with around slide 9 or 10. You had a Landsat chart that showed a different height of different trees. Yeah. Anna Prieto from Argentina asked, I think it's regarding that slide. Do the value numbers and tables refer to the Landsat bands?
Yes. Let me just make sure I'm going back to.
I want to say it's 9 or 10, I believe.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to just share my screen to make sure that we're all looking at the same thing and thinking about this. Okay. So was it this slide or?
I believe so. That's around the time she asked a question.
Okay.
So I'm
perfect.
thinking...
Yes, these are the Landsat bands. And so this is specific to Landsat 8. And the nice thing is there is this spectral characteristics viewer that allows you to go in and to select a particular instrument and to look at a couple different reference spectra that they have, even beyond just this clear water and some of what I've selected, and look at approximately how would the sensor actually see that, and where is it measuring? And you can see these. So the big gaps in between, say, band 5 here and band 9. That is a place that we can't measure from space because there's usually atmosphere involved, or mostly some sort of atmospheric issue that doesn't allow us to actually make a measurement in that particular wavelength. So you'll see that depending on the sensor that you're working with, these will move around and they will change a little bit. But you can, a scientist like me uses this to identify, if I focus in on band 5 here, I can discriminate between these 4 different land cover types. That's really what I'm looking for with something like this. If they come together kind of like right here, you know, right after band 9, where they sort of converge, that wouldn't be a good one. We're looking for separation of our land cover types. And this is what a scientist will do. And so even though a measurement has been made in all these different wavelengths, well, we can just kind of focus in on one of them that actually helps us to discriminate our features of interest. And so I do recommend everybody, you know, go and explore the spectral characteristic viewer, because that's what scientists are using to understand what's on the landscape, and then to make some of those maps that I was showing you.
Okay, so last question, because I know we're kind of going to get behind in time here. The last question is, Zimaha asked, one of my students was wondering how snow-covered areas might affect the satellite data collected.
That's a great one. And so what it will do is it will reflect more light. And so every area will seem brighter. But if there's trees there, you will still have a shadowy component to it. It will be darker than the surrounding snow. And so if you have, and this kind of is part of why that height of that land cover can be very important. And so if you have a vegetation that is less than a meter or tall, and you have snow that comes down on top of that, that snow will probably cover it completely. And so what you're getting is the reflection of the snow itself. Right. And with trees, they tend to be so tall that not only do they intercept some of that snow and melt it actually pretty quickly, but then it will also be scattered around. And so that kind of shadowy piece of things really kind of darkens the overall snow, the snow measurement that happens there. And so that is a way that we would be able to kind of identify tree covered areas versus other ones. One of the important characteristics I didn't really highlight here is a lot of what I've been talking about is like evergreen trees like this, where it's green the whole entire year. One of the ways that scientists can identify deciduous trees is to focus on the leaf off time period. And so that snow piece actually can really help because if it's deciduous trees and they lose their leaves, and you then have that snow reflecting it rather than the leaves, it will still be pretty bright. And then if you compare that to the summer, you'll have a darker pixel. And so that difference between your winter reflection and your summer reflection can actually help us to determine whether what type of trees are in that location. And so that seasonality piece of the land cover type we can exploit it to better improve our maps with that. So actually doing leaf on, leaf off imaging is really a beneficial and a good strategy that that remote sensing scientists use a lot to try to also discriminate between grasses and deciduous trees, which can look very much the same in the summer, but in the winter, they look very different because of that shadow piece that comes from the trunks and the structure of the trees itself. So, like you said, Peter, I could keep going for a long time. So I appreciate the opportunity to for everybody here to come and join. And we'll be doing more of these. And in January, I really will be focusing on not only these maps, but the tools that you might be able to use to evaluate and to make use of them in your area. So I hope this was a really good introduction to some of these things that we'll be focusing in on in that January, February, March timeframe.
Thank you very much, Peter. And if you want you want more, Peter, we actually do have an interview of him on our website. I believe the link is in the email as well. So if you want to learn more about his research and what he's been up to, feel free to go ahead and click on that link. So thank you once again, Peter, for a wonderful presentation. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to Dorian Jenny, who's Education and Communications Lead for the GPM mission. And she's going to be talking to us today about story maps. So go ahead and take it over, Dorian.
Sounds like a plan. And one of the things that I'm going to need to ask you guys to do is, I'll ask Brian to do is, first of all, can you hear me, Brian? Thumbs up if you can. All right, cool. And then once I turn on this video that I made showing a screenshot of how to create a story map, again, if you'll just give me the thumbs up, Brian, if you can hear me, and if you can't, I can talk over it. So, as Peter was talking, and every time we have somebody come on and talk, I'm always intrigued by this, the millions of things that there are to know, and just how important it is to be a storyteller. Someone who's able to convey their science to others. And Peter, you do such a great job of that. That's and Christopher, you as well. It's always so nice when you have scientists who know how to tell their story. Because of course, being able to communicate your findings to others is really huge. So what I'm going to walk you through next is something called story maps. This is free to anyone, and you can also get the kind of more advanced version, which is free to all schools and teachers within the United States. So what I'm going to be showing you is fairly easy to do, especially if you are, for the young folk, and those of you who are young folk, most of you are younger folk than I, who were brought up using computers and just really know how to get in there and work with them. I always say that I need to make sure that I spend some time using story maps to kind of show some of the trips that I've been on, to give me an experience using kind of my own personal pictures and maps and bring those together. As you look at this, even before you start to have your students work with story maps or yourself or people who you're working with, you might have them get in there and kind of create a story. They'll get in there and probably work with it very intuitively and share that story. And it could be a story about, the trees in their yard, if they're able to go outside safely and take these images, and the land cover. So that's what I'm going to be presenting to you next. So let me bring this up and hope that it is going to work. Let me make it big once it comes up. And this is basically me going through screenshots and creating a video to show you how to make your own story map.
Well, greetings.
Are you able to hear this, Brian?
How easy it is to create a story
Yeah, I
map.
can hear it. You can't just see that on your slide there.
First thing you want to think about when you're creating a story.
Oh, you just see the
you wanna
slide.
think
Okay, so
about
let me figure out.
Why are you creating
do
the
a new
story?
share.
Who is your intended audience? So in this case, my intended audience is you. The key takeaways that I want you to be able to do
Now,
as a
can you see
result of
it?
me showing you this is to be able to come over here to this ArcGIS story maps, be able to pick a type of story map. In this case, we're going to go ahead and do one
Just
called a
let me know if you're
sidecar.
not seeing it.
There's lots of different kinds of
Yeah, I see
stories.
where it's like title. Title of the story.
Template to use. Go ahead and try this out.
Oh, how
Try this out
frustrating.
with some
I
vacation.
see it on my end, Dorian.
Okay, then I'll go back to share
You want to try
and back
creating
to
story maps a couple of different times in a couple of different ways to learn how
wanna
to
see that-
use this
YouTube
really
video?
powerful tool. So I'm going to call this December 8th, 2020.
You're good.
And I'm going to say showing folks how to make a story map. And I'm going to come down, I'm going to start over here where it says add a cover image. And because we're talking about how to use the trees around the globe tool, I'm going to use that lovely image there. So I'm going to stick that in. And basically, I've just taken these and created what's called a content inventory. So I have in a file where I've put different media that I want to use. So over here, I'm going to start with a map because I think it's important to show you where I am located here. So I'm going to pick this one. Next time, I will show you how to create a map because that's super important. So I'm going to start off with a welcome. And I took my cell phone and I went and took a couple of different videos, very, very short videos that show where in my yard I'm looking at the trees and the land cover and how I took my observations. So I then took them and I went to, what is it called? I went to YouTube and I those little videos up. Then I use those links to be able to import them into my story map. So picking a tree to measure. I still didn't get that right. Okay, picking a tree to measure. And then I'm going to come over here to this plus sign. And when I come down here to this plus, I have some different options. Text, a button, a separator, and my image, my video. Let me go ahead and put in a separator there just for fun, why not? And then a video and a link. So when I was taking those videos, I also took a short video, a couple seconds long, to show how I selected which tree I was going to use. So I'm going to add that. And then we're going to come down a little bit. And I'm going to put some text in here again, and then I'm going to say measuring my trees height, and come down here, and again put in my video, put in my link, and grab my link here, and pop my link in. So add, and you see, once you've got your different resources you're going to use, this really goes very quickly. Then I'm going to now add what's called a button. Okay, this button is where I can say, people just push on this button and it will go directly to an online site. In this case, where I want it to go is to where my observations are. So I'm going to put that in there. That's my globe observations. And now when somebody touches that button, and I'll show you that in a little bit, it will go directly to my observations. Okay, over here, I'm going to put in a separator. And now I'm going to come down and I'm going to add another map. Because what I'm going to be doing next is I'm going to be showing you how I created a land cover. I did a land cover observation. I'm putting in here a map that shows the land cover in my neighborhood. So I'm going to come down here. Let me put in a little bit of text, and that is going to be, I'm doing a land cover observation. So that's my text. Then I'm going to stick a video in there. Grab my first land cover video where I talk about how to do a land cover observation. So that's my short YouTube video for that. And then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to do one more plus and some text. And I'm going to say, taking my observation. And then I'm going to add a video. Last video we have for this. Pop it in here, get to my link, and paste and add. And then, again, because I would like you to be able to see my land cover observations. Oops, come on back up here. Going through this a little too fast. Okay, blah, 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 land cover. And here, put in a button and my observations. And then grab that link, again, that goes directly to my observations and pop it in there. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now let's go to preview and see what we have. So here I could see it, what it will look like on a smartphone, on a tablet, or on the computer. So we'll go ahead and look at it, how it would look on the computer. There's that graphic, there's that text, there's the map. And what's really neat about these maps is we can actually go and go in a little bit closer and go and really.
Okay, let's see if I can go back to my PowerPoint slide. And let's see here. Try to, oops, don't want to open that up. Come back over here and close that and see if I can close that. What I'm trying to do is show you something that I had up underneath. Let me just open it up again and get back here to Zoom, make sure I can show you. And what I wanted to show you finally was what it ends up looking like. Let's see, that should do it. And share and go here. And okay, now I'm going to come over here and you can see I did lots and lots of trials, or not lots and lots, there's some of the trials that I had. Here's what it looks like published. And you know, and once you kind of follow those steps and you have things together, it only takes, and this is of course very, very rudimentary, but it doesn't take long at all to pull it together. So here you've got this map, and what's really neat with these maps is you can go ahead and they're, you know, they are interactive. You can actually, you know, use your buttons and make them larger, make them smaller. You can engage with that content. So here I'll put on that beginning.
I want to show you just how easy it is to gather some globe data using the Globe Observer tree height and land cover tools, and then to put them into a story map. So let me turn this around. This is going to be the biggest tech challenge for me.
And then, so there that one was, and then here it was picking a tree, make that big again.
And let's come over here and select a tree and a land cover observation to do.
You know, and so hopefully this is one of these things that just shows you that they can be really nice, short videos that your students are taking, and then they can, you know, somebody could come right onto here. Now, what happened was I did those observations, and then I got excited when I was down at the bay, visiting my mother-in-law this weekend. There was a lot of standing water. So I thought, oh, I'll have to do some mosquito habitat mapper observations. And while I was doing that, I thought, well, I promised I'll do some land cover ones at the same time, and I may as well do some tree height ones. So lots of observations from this past weekend. But when I come down here, what I have are my land cover observations that were taken from the tree that I was standing at. And then I went through and I did my, characterization of what I was seeing. And then here was the tree that I was focusing on, which I noticed with that kind of gray sky didn't really show up as well as I would have liked it to have. But these are just some of the kind of, you know, interesting things you can do. It's just kind of like a highly interactive PowerPoint, if you will. And I think it's a really interesting thing to have your students take a look at, for you to take a look at, and they can use this, a story map in place of a poster or in place of a video for the International Virtual Science Symposium. And I do think it's one of those things that once the students get in there and start messing with it, they will just fly. So there you have it. I hope that was helpful, and I'll hang around and see if there are any questions. Oh, I guess I wanted to throw one more thing in there. As Peter was talking about maps and just how much you can learn from a map and the value of maps telling stories, it really hit me that this is a nice tool to use in addition to being able to throw your videos in there, which the students are going to love, and showing your location and sharing that out. But also you can get in there and do a whole lot of engagement and interaction and using maps, especially when you get into understanding and working with the Esri platform and the ArcGIS. There's lots of opportunities there. So they can make it as complicated or as easy as they like.
Does anybody have any questions for Dorian?
And I'll stick the link to the story map in there in case you should want to look at the whole thing at your leisure. But again, it's very, very rudimentary.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dorian. And the combination of what Dorian showed you and what Peter showed you with all the online tools, and Dorian with the story mapping, you can see that there's so many different ways that you can have your students, do research projects. And some of them can be very complicated, some of them can be simple. It all depends upon how much you want your student to get involved with it, how much effort they want to put into it. But there's lots of different ways that they can do by IVSS research projects, and that's what we're going to focus on for the next part of the campaign starting in January. And to finish off, I'm going to go back to sharing my screen in a second and finish off with 2 slides here, some things that I want you to think about for the next time. So I want you to take a look at at these 2 questions here. These are 2 questions that we want you to think about for the January 2021 webinar, where we talk about the science and how to get students involved, and what, the platforms, the data, the research for them to get involved with for IVSS or any other type of, it could be local virtual science fairs, anything like in the URS and the US, the SRS, virtual science fairs for the 5 different regions. But here's some questions we want you to think about. Please contact us at any time. Anybody on the team, how to get a hold of us. You see the emails come out. If you don't want to talk to me, or you want to talk to Peter, or if you want, Peter Nelson, you want to talk to Peter Falcon or Dorian, just, feel free to go to any of us. So a couple questions here just to think about. Will your students be doing IVSS projects as part of the campaign? Don't have to answer that now. If you like, you can throw it in the chat. I mean, that's cool. You can do that. Go ahead. And then also, do you need help from the Trees campaign with your students' research projects? We're here to help you. We have, the necessary knowledge to help you with the science, with the technical aspects, the online tools. Peter is the expert on the online tools and working with that. So, we're here to help you as a campaign team to do this. Now, we're not going to do the project for you, for your students. That's different. I've actually had some emails where some students have sent me literally 30 questions asking me every single answer to the research questions. And I said, I can help you get started where you need to go to help answer these questions, but I can't answer it for you. So we're here to help, okay? So please don't forget that. And on our campaign page, you will see this link here on one of the pages, submitting your student research project to the Globe 2021 International Virtual Science Symposium. There's a link to IVSS to learn more about it from the Globe side of things. But then also, if you're uncertain or you want some more information about how you can get your students to look at the data, come talk to us, send us an email. Here's a bit.ly link on the bottom. It's a short link to take you directly where this is located here. So the idea here is to, get students to look at the data, use a bunch of the tools that Peter has talked about since basically, beginning of the campaign, the story mapping that Dorian has done for year 3, looking at the trees in the news information that Christopher has shared throughout the year 3 of the webinars of the campaign, because all that information, if you go to the webinar page of our campaign, you will see under the recording, the archive recording of each webinar, there will be the links to what we discussed during each of the webinars. There'll be links to what was shown in the presentations. There will be links to what was shown in the trees in the news, and any other links that anyone had put in as part of their, that it's affiliated with any of the presentations that happened during that webinar. They're all there. So please feel free to contact us at any time regarding this. We really want your students to, to take part in the IVSS. It's a really cool thing. And I know a lot of you on here, your students have already, and we thank you for that. And we know that they will continue to do that. But I know there's always some hesitancy with, figuring out, because data research using real data is tough. It's really hard for students to just say, oh, here's my research project. This is what I'm going to do. We know that's hard. And that's what we've been trying to do in the first part of this. We've been trying to teach you that science, but also the tools that you can use. And in January, February, March, we're going to focus even more on, what some of these tools are and how you can, fine tune, how the students can fine tune their research. And we're really gonna, lean on Peter a lot for this next part, because he's the one who really is an expert in finding out what is the best, online tools suitable for the research that we want to do. Okay, so that's where we're coming from with this. Does anybody have any questions, any final questions? And as you know, we did extend these webinars this year to 90 minutes because of all the information that we want to include. So as you see, we ran even just over that by a couple minutes. So anyone have any final thoughts? Well, everyone, please stay safe. Please stay healthy. If you celebrate the holidays, have a great holiday season, and I will send you the recording when Zoom lets me know it's processed. I will put it up on the website, as well as all the links that are in the chat from Peter and Christopher and everyone else. So please feel free to contact us at any time regarding the campaign, student research, and anything else you want to talk about. So thank you so much, and I will stop the recording right now.